A true story. Someone I have known for years emotionally injured me on more than one occasion. I held immense anger for this person. With time, I knew that I had to forgive the person, which I eventually did. But then my trust was violated again, and anger ensued again. I found myself caught in the continuous, recurring loop of trust, hurt, anger, forgiveness, trust, hurt, anger, etc. I felt trapped in that cycle, even though my faith told me I must forgive. Today's readings address my struggle. In today's gospel, Jesus addresses my endless forgiveness cycling with a shocking parable. Jesus is seemingly condoning the dishonest servant. Jesus would often use hyperbole and shock in a parable to get our attention. The steward misused his master's money, so the master fires him, thus potentially leaving him penniless. Before news of his firing becomes public, he shrewdly starts to partially forgive the debts of the master's debtors in order to win favor for himself with those debtors for his future life among them. The shock is that the master commends the steward for his actions, even though it was not the steward's money that the steward was giving away. Jesus tells this parable not to condone stealing, but to demonstrate that if we can be so shrewd in winning worldly favor by forgiving monetary debts, we should certainly be just as shrewd in winning God's heavenly favor by forgiving spiritual debts. The word debt in today's gospel refers not to money, but to hurt. In short, we have to do what Jesus taught us in the Our Father as stated in Matthew's gospel. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. But forgiveness is hard. So today, let's put aside the pious platitudes and be shrewd, as Jesus tells us in today's gospel. Taking Jesus' advice while on a retreat at a Trappist monastery, I consulted with monk Father William Meninger, who had just published a book entitled The Process of Forgiveness. We sat together under the aspen trees in the monastery valley amongst snow-capped mountains. I will share with you what the monk taught me about the necessary stages of my spiritual journey toward forgiveness, which were denial, anger, bargaining, guilt, and acceptance. Why we cannot get hung up too long in any one preparatory stage, and why it was shrewd for Jesuit Father Matt Lynn to title one of his books, Don't Forgive Too Soon. First, I was in denial of who the perpetrator was. He was actually a person at my office, but I didn't want to face that reality and confrontation. So I sought solace from those who loved me the most, my family. My denial was healthy because it allowed me to not be overwhelmed by too much pain until I was ready. However, it went on too long. I got stuck and unfortunately and unconsciously picked on my dear wife as if she were the perpetrator. It is not uncommon for family members to attack each other for frivolous things, while the real reason is deeper and more fundamental. She put up with it until finally she started to justifiably defend herself. At that point, I was forced to address the real perpetrator. For some of us, that may be a person or an institution, even possibly the church that we perceive has hurt us. Then I really got angry with the individual. My anger was healthy because it allowed me to recognize the injustice. St. Thomas Aquinas said, "Virtue consists in being angry at the right person for the right reason and for the right amount of time." After all, Jesus was justifiably angry with the money changers in the temple. Once I had recognized and admitted the hurt, I sometimes was vengeful, and at other times swallowed the abuse. This is the classic fight or flight response. My fight took the form of intellectual and physical response in sending emails and making threats. My flight took the form of avoidance, missing meetings, and not returning phone calls. In speaking of the perpetrator, I used absolutes, as always and never. With time, I came to realize that I was not hurting the perpetrator, but myself. Studies have shown that those stuck in the anger stage are 7 times more likely to die by age 50. Hostility scores are a better predictor of death than cardiac illness, smoking, high blood pressure, or high cholesterol. Realizing that my anger was unhealthy spiritually and physically, I had to do something. So I moved to the next stage, bargaining. This was not necessarily with just the perpetrator, but also with myself. I had to set up boundaries and conditions. I wanted compensation, changes in behavior, and the offender suffering the consequences. I had to deal with my big mistake of getting forgiveness mixed up with trust. Forgiveness is free, but trust must be earned and is not necessarily part of the bargain. This was a healthy stage because it helped me define the real problem and my need to set boundaries. Medical studies show that if we can work through the bargains to get unconditional love, we physically become healthier because there is a rise in immunoglobulin A, which fights colds and infections. But I started to recognize if I stayed too long in this stage, I ran the risk of the extremes of vengeance or enabling future abuse. Then I began to realize that I was not totally blameless in the encounter and started to enter the guilt stage. Even though I had originally and correctly identified the offender and assessed the bargain, I was now having some misgivings about my earlier judgments. Hypocritically, what hurt me was similar to an offense I had perpetrated against someone else. I saw that I had overreacted in the anger stage, so I started to own some of the blame. This was healthy because it gave me better balance in not accusing the other person for everything, but taking on some responsibility, which gave me some empathy for the offender. However, I was losing sleep, eating less, and becoming oversensitive to criticism. I realized that I was getting stuck in this stage, which was leading me to unhealthy feelings of scrupulosity and sadness. I started more physical exercise and daily assessment of the true blessings in my life. Thankfully, this naturally and finally led me to the stage of acceptance. St. Mother Teresa, just canonized 2 weeks ago, said it best. In the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. She also said, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. Each one of them is Jesus in disguise. I finally started to feel true peace and wholeness, slept better, was willing to risk criticism, and say yes more often. This is the final healthy stage in which I needed to be stuck. Science tells us that if we are in this stage, we have better circulation, digestion, sleep, and live an average of 5 years longer. Magnetic resonance imaging scans during this phase show increased brain function. Jesus said in Matthew's Gospel how often we must forgive, not 7 times, but 77 times. The point is not that there are necessarily 77 people that we must forgive, but often the same person 77 times, because saying forgive and forget is not possible. And so it was for my journey of forgiveness. Every time I would remember, I would have to cycle through the stages again and again. But each time it became easier, faster, and less frequent. So let us all now participate in a guided meditation as we honestly evaluate our inner selves by answering questions with pauses for reflections. Please close your eyes now, sit upright, hands on your knees, and head straight. Have I identified my real offender? Do I believe it is okay to initially be angry at my offender? Have I identified what will satisfy me before I will forgive? Do I have some guilt in order to give balance to my anger? Am I ready to move forward and experience the freedom and joy of truly forgiving my enemy, the debtor? Amen.